Hey y'all, I'm Shama of the Yarn This podcast. Jessie's Girl 84 on Ravelry, Instagram, and Twitter. Today is Vita, hashtag SSSVita 2017 day 16. Today I'm going to talk about my parents. My parents grew up literally right across the street from each other. They started school together and finished school together. My mom and dad they didn't interact. My uncle played with dad and all the other boys in the neighborhood, and they did all kinds of fun stuff, but mom and dad just really didn't have anything in common. As a matter of fact, they said the only time they ever talked, or she ever talked, was, I guess, their junior year. And she saw him in the hall and she said, "Our senior rings are in." And he didn't even say anything. He just turned around and went and got his ring. So they grew up in vastly different families. My dad's parents were abusive. He was the baby of 3. He and his sister were both abused. But my mom's parents were very different. My grandmother was extremely calm and soft-spoken. My granddad had also come from an abusive background, so he was louder, but he was not physically abusive to them. Anyway, Mom remembers hearing Daddy outside playing basketball till late at night. That was to keep him from having to go in. And he remembers seeing them drive off as a family to go different places, to do things as a family, maybe to go to worship, and he always wished he could go with them. Jump ahead to their high school graduation. Mom went to college, and Daddy had enlisted in the Army. And Daddy was in Vietnam very, very early. Oh, I didn't say that my parents were born in 1939. Daddy was born in July, and Mom was born in December. Daddy had enlisted in the Army and was in the very, very early stages of Vietnam, while Mom was at home going to college, and they still didn't have any kind of relationship or anything. Dad trained as a paratrooper and was in Vietnam and ended up being shot down while he was parachuting down. It was a secret mission, so nobody came looking for them. And out of all the guys that jumped that day, I think there were 63 or 64 guys that jumped that day. My dad and 2 other guys were the only ones that even lived. And my dad was the only one of the 3 that lived that was injured. Well, he was in the jungles of Vietnam, and a Bengal tiger was stalking him because of the blood. So he was having to sleep while the tiger was awake and travel while the tiger was asleep. And during this time, it was about a week. It was also monsoon season, and if you don't know what that is, it means it rains all the time. And at the very end of the ordeal, he was in a rice paddy, and he had kind of climbed up a little bit of an incline, and that tiger was jumping at him. I mean, he was there, and he was like leaping at my dad. And it was so rainy and so muddy that the tiger kept sliding back, and that was the only thing that saved Daddy. And then he heard a helicopter, and he said at that point he didn't care if it was us or the Vietnamese. He just wanted out. So he stepped out, and it just was so lucky for all of us that it was an American helicopter, and he was rescued. He was flown to the Philippines, and he stayed there for 6 months, and they thought that they were going to have to amputate his leg because gangrene had set in his ankle. But he said, "No, you're not going to amputate," and he stayed, and they kept working with him, and finally they were able to save his leg, and he was released. Just a second. So at the end of that time, Daddy was sent back home, and he went to work for the electric company, reading meters. But before he finished high school, he already had a scholarship to play basketball at Sam Houston State in Huntsville, Texas. When he came back, it was January, and he was going to start to college the next fall. someone set Mom and Dad up on a date, and they went out that night, and they went to see a movie at a theater in Beaumont called the Jefferson Theater, which is still there, and it's old, and they do really neat things there now. And I don't remember what the name of the movie was they saw. They've told me, but I can't remember. And then they went to a place called the Pig Stand, and there were two in Beaumont, and the one that they went to was recently destroyed. But anyway, so that was their first date. That was in January. In March, Daddy gave Mom a ring, and they got married in January. That was I said they got married in January. I'm sorry, they got married in June of 1962. And they've been married ever since. They both taught school. Daddy coached. They have always been excellent parents and excellent grandparents as well. And I feel very, very fortunate to have them. Now, I've mentioned a couple of times about a wreck. Almost 2 years ago, it'll be June 6th will be 2 years. My mother, my older son and his girlfriend were in my son's car, and we had all been to visit my brother and his family to see my nephew's Taekwondo belt test. And Dad couldn't go that day because he had hurt his back, so Mom rode with us. And then she rode back home with my son and his girlfriend. On the way back, my son had a seizure. He'd never had one before. And he was driving, and they had a horrible, horrible car wreck. He and his girlfriend were pretty much okay. It kind of hurt their shoulder. The car flipped. It was awful. But my mom took off her seatbelt because they thought he had fallen asleep. They were trying to wake him up. And she and his girlfriend were trying to wake him up. And when the car flipped, it threw my mom up. But as it turns out, the car landed on the tail end. So the back seat and front seat were squished together. And my dad said when they went to look at the car, it was just like razor sharp metal. If she had kept her seatbelt on, she would have been tied down to that seat and it would have killed her. But as it was, she was life flighted to the nearest town, which is where my brother happens to live, thank goodness, to Tyler, Texas. And they operated on her, not terribly long considering, but it turned out they had to amputate her lower left leg. Her neck was broken. Her 6 ribs, her pelvis in 4 places, her left clavicle, her right upper arm up in here was all shattered. She had a little bit of internal bleeding, but by the next morning it had stopped. But they told us that night that she wasn't even going to make it out of surgery. So my husband and I had actually gone to Fort Worth, and we were there. We were at Fort Worth fixing to go to an IndyCar race when my son called and told us what had happened. So we turned around and went back, but it was like a 3-hour drive back. So it took us forever to get there. My son and his girlfriend were in one town, and my mom was in another town an hour and a half away. Anyway, it turned out that everybody lived. Mom was in the hospital from June until October. And from June until August, my dad was there every single day. I was there every day in June, and then I had to come home because at that point my son couldn't drive because of the seizure. And also he didn't have a car, so he needed me to come home so that I could start taking him to work. Anyway, I'm talking about my parents. My dad was there every day from June until August when school started back, and he was working at school. And then he was there every single weekend. Well, finally in August, they released Mom to go to rehab, and they were able to get her into a rehab in Lufkin, which is where my parents live. And she was there until just after the first of the year, where she came home. Well, this has been a huge adjustment for them. Everything that she did, she does some now, and she does really well. But it's been a huge adjustment. But my parents have stuck it out through thick and thin, and they have shown us what it means to stay together through sickness and health. And They are 77. Both of them are 77. And Daddy will be 78 in July and Mom will be 78 in December. But I wanted to show you, this was just less than a month before the wreck. This was Mother's Day. And most of us were there that day. Then just a few weeks later, of course, like I said, was the wreck. And I was just going to show you. One day when Mom was in the hospital, her brother, and she only has one living sibling, her only other sibling, her sister, died when she was 6 years old and Mom was 2. But my uncle was at the hospital visiting, and they were all talking about growing up together across the street and the things that they did, and the funny things. They had so many funny stories to tell. I'm sorry, just a second. I'm still looking for that picture. I must have passed it. Here it is. My mom had to wear a halo, and up until this happened, I didn't know about halos or what they were or anything. So this is a picture of Mom in the hospital with her halo. There's my mom. There's my dad right there, and there's my Uncle Larry. And these are people that have known each other their entire lives. Their entire lives. Anyway, so Mom finally got to come home, and they worked together. And I know it's not easy because there's just been so many adjustments. And you know, the older you get, the harder it is to adjust to things. But, oh, sorry, my dryer just went off. I forgot about that. But they have taught us so well about everything we needed to know. They've always been there for us. I remember my dad taking me to the skating rink on Friday nights when I was in junior high and high school, and they had 2 sessions, and he would take his quarter horse journal, and he would just sit there and read his magazine through both sessions, and he never complained. This was my mom while she was in rehab. I just feel very fortunate to have my parents, to have them both alive and still together, and being the best parents and grandparents that a girl could have. I didn't mean to go on so long, but I just wanted to tell y'all about them, and what a wonderful life we've had. I'll talk to y'all later. Bye.